Welcome once again, everybody that is in the chat, everybody that is in the clouds. I appreciate you all for being here for another psychoeducational presentation by yours truly, Dempsey Darrell Spears, aka D Darrell, aka the Godfather, aka Goat Coach D. And to all the millions that don't like you, don't like me, the hell with you too. But that hate watch me, you can do so and learn something. It's all good. So I appreciate each and every one of you for coming in today. I am going to have a somewhere between a 45-minute to maybe an hour and a half at the most presentation on cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, I like to say that this is one of the more enjoyable presentations that I enjoy doing, and the reason why is because I actually practice and I have studied cognitive behavioral therapy for well over 20 years. Um, I did not begin my career using cognitive behavioral therapy a lot. I just want you all to preface that. As I continued, I slowly began to incorporate this into therapy. Originally, as I began my counseling career, I used person-centered therapy, and I used a lot of aspects of behavioral therapy because I was treating a lot of kids with behavioral disorders, and so I primarily used behavioral therapy. And also, when I treated adults, I also utilized behavioral therapy along with cognitive behavioral, and I used some aspects of solution focused therapy. As I began to gain more experience and began to treat a variety of clients from all different types of backgrounds. When I relocated to Texas, uh, I worked in a facility that was community based, and you were getting a very um I got a different very different a large variety of or a large range of different type of issues. I adjusted my therapeutic framework to focus more on those issues, and I felt like it was a need to incorporate different techniques and um, different style techniques and measurements of treating behavior. So I incorporated more of cognitive behavioral therapy. And also, when I moved to the state of Texas, they decided to move into a different school of thought, as it involves the implementation of therapy and mental health procedures, policy, treatment, goals, delivery of services, and they recommended the use and they chose cognitive behavioral therapy as being more effective to identify the levels of success and failures and regression, decompensation of behavior, mental health. They were studying that to minimize the use of hospitals as a primary need to treat mental health clients because it's also the most expensive. So in that journey, um, I began to focus more on learning, which I've already I knew theoretically I already was aware of it. Was efficient. I just never. Uh, I just wanted to use other different types of treatment. There are tons of different theories. There's tons of different therapy techniques to use. Tons of different theoretical approaches to come from. Just that cognitive behavioral therapy was not one that I chose to use at that time, and that was based on the type of clients. Because early in my career, I dealt with more children and very few adults. And so when I moved to Texas, it was a direct opposite. I began to primarily deal with adults and very few children. And once I became licensed, I began to deal with more children and families. And so I felt that my competency level in cognitive behavioral therapy um, was basically something that I had um, to obtain in order to be a better therapist. Now I could have also used other, because there's different types of cognitive theories. You know, there's rational emotive behavioral therapy or rational emotive therapy. There's also other cognitive theories, and then there's cognitive behavioral therapy, and others. So in my presentation today, I will be highlighting um, as far as cognitive therapies itself, cognitive behavioral therapies, how it came about. I want you all to understand that cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the most widely used therapeutic orientations in this country and abroad. One of the more popular ones. And I know that a lot of people, when they think of therapy or psychology, they think of psychoanalysis, they think of Freudian type um, theory, which which is used a lot, but not as much as others. And one of the reasons that cognitive behavioral therapy is more widely used is because it flows well with empirical research and it's observable. You can observe and measure success rates. And I will talk about that further in this presentation, in how cognitive theory has evolved into cognitive behavioral therapy and the empirical research that can support the efficacy of this type of therapeutic approach. Okay. Now, here, I'm going to talk about the origins of CBT. And I would like to first identify that Aaron Beck, Dr. Aaron Beck, is known as the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. He began his work with the development of cognitive theory. Okay. So he didn't originally start off or begin with the process of creating it. Evolved into cognitive behavior because when he in the infancy stages of his theory, it was mainly cognitive based. And one of the reasons that he decided to go into a more cognitive base is because in his training, he was primarily using psychoanalysis. And at the time, there were two main theories that were used, and that was either behavioral therapy or cognitive therapy. So there was a big fight between the behaviorists and also the psychoanalysis. Okay. And so Aaron Beck began his quest towards developing cognitive theory. His theoretic framework establishes there's a genetic, biological, and environmental factors that contribute to maladaptive behaviors. We're going to focus on automatic thoughts, irrational beliefs, cognitive distortions, core beliefs, cognitive schemas, and intermediate beliefs. Now, as I talk about this, I would like you to take a look at the third paragraph where I talked about cognitive distortions. I plan to spend a lot of time today focusing on cognitive distortions. And the reason why I'm going to focus on cognitive distortions, because it will give light to things that you may see and hear on social media within your families. It could present a way of educating you on understanding red flags. Now, as I talk about this, I want you all to understand, as a clinician, my approach to identifying maladaptive or ineffective, or I would say self-defeating behaviors, is to look at this and observe it from a objective standpoint. Now, when people go on their events on YouTube about people that have done them certain ways and they have this illness and that illness, they're coming primarily from a non-objective manner. Everything that I'm going to talk about is going to strictly be objective. My feelings have nothing to do with it. Those people that I feel that I cannot take my feelings out, I will not speak on. That's unprofessional and unethical for me. But I love saying, can I get a few CUs for watching D? I tell you what, I am actually thinking about creating a host of videos and presenting them to the TCA or the LPC board, and they can approve you for presentations. So I'm actually thinking about doing that. Maybe I can be of use. That's funny. Okay. I also would like to posture that um, there's a development of logical, rational, and constructive ways to change thought. Now, one of the key techniques that I utilize in cognitive therapy is cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring is basically replacing negative or maladaptive or unproductive thoughts with more positive thoughts. That is actually part of the CBT model. Now, it could be phrased in different ways. When we're dealing with cognitive schemas, we're dealing with automatic thoughts, irrational beliefs. And so I'm going to tackle those things and I'm going to talk about these things as it relates to that. So the focus on automatic thoughts, irrational beliefs, cognitive distortions, core beliefs, intermediate beliefs. This is the basis of the therapeutic interaction between the client and the therapist. As the therapist, your job is to identify that based on what the client is stating. Also, in this process, we'll discuss how the structure, the therapeutic structure that is presented in CBT, because CBT can be highly structured. And for some populations and some illnesses, it can be too structured. And I'm going to talk more about that later. Also, logical coping mechanisms. I will talk about logical coping mechanisms. Cognitive therapy was later labeled cognitive behavioral therapy with the addition of connecting the behavioral dynamics of human behavior. And so we're gonna talk about those things. We're gonna go more into detail. I will give my professional opinion and impression on the things that were discussed as far as the focus. Okay. Now, what I would like to do is I'm going to briefly talk about. I don't want to go too much in detail with giving a basis of what each uh, area of focus or label as far as the concepts. When we're talking about cognitive distortions, we're talking about thoughts that are irrational. When we're talking about automatic thoughts, we're talking about things that initially come to mind. Irrational beliefs, things that are basically that don't make sense, things that are not necessarily relative to the situation. The core beliefs of a person, more about as far as things that you formalize, that you think, um, things that lie dormant, things within yourself. I also, again, we want to talk about the fact that genetic, biological, and environmental experiences affect cognitive schemas or core beliefs, which is kind of like the same thing. And then we're going to look at as far as intermediate beliefs. Okay, meaning that these are beliefs that these is attitudes that you may have, rules, expectations, assumptions about life. These are things that people just assume are supposed to be, or it is just, this is my thoughts is basically what everybody else thinks. This is the core of who I am. But of everything that's talked about, I think more importantly, I would like to focus more on cognitive distortions. And the reason why I want to focus more on cognitive distortions is because cognitive distortions will make up most of the therapeutic interaction between you and the client. How a person automatically assumes, thinks about things, assumptive behavior. And I want you all to basically just sit back and pretty much fasten your seatbelt, because what I'm going to talk about, because what my approach today is to give a theoretical understanding and paint a image of what this looks like in a clinical situation and how people practice these types of behavior on YouTube and other social media outlets. I'd like you all to understand that I treat people who have issues in these areas all the time on a daily basis. I have had issues with people misbehaving in social media, at their jobs, with their families, their marriages, every life domain, or every area of their life, they may exhibit these behaviors. Now, the first one is all or nothing thinking. And I want to repeat that. All or nothing thinking. Okay? Meaning it's one way or the other. Or sometimes what I may, it's also coined dualistic, or white or black distortions. And this is basically when people see things in black or white. Does this sound familiar? There are certain people in red pill communities, pink pill communities, divestment communities. They see it as one way or another. There's no in between. There is no flexibility. Especially with one of the most complex aspects of human experience is relationships. All relationships have some level of complexity. And in that complexity, there is some levels of simplicity. But that is all relevant to you and the person that you're interacting with, whether you're related, non-related, in a romantic relationship or not, past history, and also environmental as far as how you were taught to communicate and function in those relationships. Throughout social media, we hear a lot of all in or nothing thinking. It's either one way or the other. And if you don't think one way, it has to be the other way. And that's it. Nothing in between. And so many people present themselves in a way as if you don't agree with them, you're automatically wrong. Also, catastrophic thinking. Catastrophic thinking. That's the second one. And I hope you all can see this well, because I thought I highlighted it. I can see it, but I don't know as far as it kind of, maybe I should have used a different color. So it's basically the catastrophization of issues, things that going on in your life, making assumptions that something will go wrong rather than looking at situations more realistically and scientifically. To me, when you look at red pill ideology and those that claim a demographic of people or gender, every time that they speak on it, they always speak of something going wrong and not looking at that situation more realistically or even scientifically. Again, this is applicable to social media related and sector related behaviors. There are people who believe if you support a man trying to start a school, you're automatically one way. And if you denounce him, then you're automatically a certain way. This is another aspect. Now, I want to talk about 12 cognitive distortions because these are the primary distortions that you will encounter in a relationship, in a therapeutic environment. Okay. We're also talking about disqualifying or discounting the positive. I bring up 5 things that are positive, then you have to, I got to only bring up and only understand. We're only going to discuss the negative. Okay. In this position, even when a positive event occurs, assuming it means little in the total scheme of things. For example, that award I won at work is meaningless. Everybody wins awards. You're basically minimizing the positives to only focus on the negatives. I call it hating. I'm gonna just to black folks. When I'm talking to my black clients, I may straight up say hating. I relabel it to relate to the client. You're hating. There are people who minimize. Now, in many situations, the client is doing this to themselves. The client is minimizing their accomplishments. The client is minimizing what they're doing and focusing. This is in my estimation symptomatic of low self-esteem. No, I did not use the N-word. No, I did not. Now, in the next one, emotional reasoning. Assuming that your feelings are always correct, even when the evidence is contrary. Now, this is something that the red pill community claims that black women do all the time. That they they don't take accountability. The lack of black female accountability. So that they're stating that black women are the primary holders of emotional reasoning in relationships. Now, again, it's very difficult to believe that stance on this coming from a subjective standpoint and a negative standpoint. Next label. The next one, next concept is labeling. Defining oneself in terms of a label, a type, instead of seeing oneself in a more complex and nuanced way. For example, a person is going to say, I'm just a bad person. Look, I'm just a thug. I'm just a hood chick. I'm always introverted. I'm always argumentative. See, these are phrases that are stated. These are things that are stated. Now, you got to understand, for people in the chat, when you're in a therapeutic environment and you're with your client, they're going to speak and say all types of things. And as a therapist, I have to respond effectively. So this is not a vanilla interaction like some of the therapy, or let's say um, regulated therapy that you may see on TV. A lot of spontaneous things can happen and occur in a therapeutic interaction in a session. So people label themselves, and you're usually labeling yourselves in the negative, in a bad way. And you don't see who you are outside of that negative sense. Again, this is a process, this is symptomatic of low self-esteem. Number 6, this is one of my favorite ones: the magnification or minimization of thoughts. Magnifying the negative, minimizing the positives about oneself, another, or situation. Again, you're only looking at things from a negative position. This is the commonality upon the concepts that are talked about. We're only looking at the negatives, and we're not looking at the positives, or we're not looking at everything in between. We're only looking at things from a certain point of view that is not positive for you, that is not effective, that hinders your ability to function. The next topic: mental filter. Focusing on one's negative aspect, focusing on one negative aspect of yourself, another, or situation. Again, this is all negatively fueled. This is not you looking at yourself effectively. You're looking at yourself, and these are things that people say when they come into therapy. I'll say things such as, "I know why people stay away from me. They always see me as a disability," or "people think that I'm dumb, I'm stupid." Okay. Again, this is all products of someone who may be depressed, who has some level of anxiety, low self-esteem, low self-worth. Okay, go to the next page. We're going to focus on mind reading, overgeneralization, personalization, should and must statements, and tunnel vision. Now, when it comes to mind reading, somebody basically is making assumptions about other people. Well, they're making an assumption of what other people think of them, basically. You're assuming that other people think the worst. Okay? You're assuming that other people think that you are not a good person. You're assuming that someone thinks that, you may have a bad attitude. And to me, this particular when you're mind reading, it has some levels from a psychoanalytic standpoint. You may think this is very similar to projection in some ways. Overgeneralization. Now, this is something that happens a lot. Making large generalizations from a small event. I cannot tell you how many times I've been on panels where people have made these huge generalizations over one 1 minute snippet. I'm gonna give you a primary example. When the guy that was on the Pineapple Show from the Houston area who lied about being I think he was talking about being a astrophysicist or something like that. Turned out he was lying, and he went on about stuff and talking about himself, and it turned the woman off. I was on countless debates with people in the manosphere space, and where I argue with them about the fact that they overgeneralized this lady based on a 5-minute interaction. Also, when we're talking about distortions, those distortions are not necessarily seen the same by other people. Like, just because one person sees it that way doesn't mean that you're going to see it that way. And one of the techniques that I utilize that, I'm not going to necessarily discuss in here, but in using cognitive behavioral therapy, homework is highly recommended, and also the use of therapeutic exercises, writing, assessing things, analyzing things, in the communication. And one of the techniques that I use is that in a thought record, which is you recording thoughts and you're kind of looking at the evidence for and against type of thing, where you're basically doing therapeutic challenging, which is an aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm asking the client, when they have these distortions, please help me understand, identify the evidence for this thought or against it. Is it logical or is it illogical? And so what we're doing is we're challenging those thoughts to help them understand that those thoughts are invalid. Personalization. Believing you are the cause of another person's negative behavior. You're the cause for another person's behavior without taking into account other explanations. See, as I've talked about these distortions, there's always this innate belief that you're the center of everything that goes wrong, and that it's hard to grasp that other people can be the cause of something, or there is a variety of reasons. You tend to single out a minimal cause of the problem, and for many reasons you think you're the cause. So we personalize things. You're believing you're the reason why someone did something. This is something that a person who's going through domestic violence, somebody who's went through a traumatic event, who's physically or sexually abused, they may think they're the cause of the problem. I made him do it. It's my fault. Okay? The next one, should and must statements. Believing that oneself, others should act in a specific manner, and when they don't, you believe it is horrible. Let me repeat that. Should and must. Believing that oneself and everybody else should act or behave in a specific manner, and when they don't, you think it's a bad thing. You think it's horrible. Meaning, if you don't believe the way I believe, or say the things that I say, or act in a manner that I think is appropriate, something is wrong with you. Does that sound familiar? Please let me know in the chat. We got 12 in the chat. Appreciate you all for being here. See, I wanted to point out the distortions, because the distortions are definitely relative to what you may see and hear in your life, in your personal life, or on social media and any other aspect of your life. Last, tunnel vision, only seeing the downside or the negative aspects of a situation. Now, notice many of these distortions are very similar. They're highly similar to one another. And so these distortions are highly representative to the type of symptoms that they're presenting. And in the symptomology, you will, as a clinician, observe aspects of depression, anxiety, okay, and levels of stress, and some issues with cognitive processing. This is typical of what you would hear from people saying. And some clients would have multiple of these distortions, or maybe most of all of them. Now, I'm going to talk about the cognitive behavioral therapeutic techniques. Before I do that, I want to just give a shout out to some of the people that are in the chat as we continue. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Nikki. Shout out to Just Jocelyn Kimmy. What's up, Angie Manzor? Okay, I see her in here. And I see Butter Love. Kev just came in. Miller and the Queen Sunkiss. Appreciate you for being here. Okay. Appreciate you all for being here. Now, I want to get into CBT therapeutic techniques as listed. Again, guys, if you would like to donate to the show, you see the Cash App at the bottom. Appreciate you all for being here once again. I plan to do a presentation every Sunday. Okay, every Sunday I plan to discuss these things. I want to make it relatable to what you are experiencing or what you may see in these YouTube streets. I want to make it relatable to. Okay. And so let's see, this is 3, 6, 9, 12. I want to talk about basically 13 techniques that can be used. Okay. And this is the treatment aspect of someone who goes through cognitive behavioral therapy. First thing we want to focus on is building rapport. Building rapport to me is highly critical in the beginning or the infancy stages of the therapeutic relationship, because you have to present yourself in a manner of getting to know this person. This person has to develop trust. This person has to feel comfortable with you. You just can't come in and just think you're going to do all the work, because cognitive behavioral therapy requires work. And as you all can see in this list, I highlighted homework. And when I get to it, you'll understand why. Next thing, being collaborative in presentation. Meaning, this is a team. A team concept of two people, you being the therapist, the client being the client. We're working together. We're not working separately to help you. We're working together. When we're working on changing irrational beliefs and thoughts, we're doing this collectively. I mean, we're doing this together in a collaborative way as a collective. Not you working and I'm just presenting and processing and you are basically doing. No. This is about us doing this together. I'm here to facilitate. Socratic questioning. Now, as we talk about Socratic questioning, I want you to understand that this is a technique that I use a lot. And the basis of Socratic questioning is to challenge irrational beliefs, challenging automatic thoughts, challenging distortions, challenging intermediate beliefs, challenging maladaptive behaviors that are the result of this. We are basically trying to help you understand a more productive way to function, a better way to think. This takes time and effort. Socratic questioning allows the therapist, facilitates the questions in such a manner that the client, him or herself, run out of things to think about in a way that they have to. It's almost leading you to thinking in a logical way. And it's almost like in that process, you try to show some level of resistance until when you hear yourself in those responses, sooner or later you're going to figure out that, okay, I'm obviously doing something wrong. I need to change something. So you're basically asking challenging and logical questions to disprove maladaptive thought processes. The fourth thing is psychoeducation. Okay. Now, I made a little typo there. But in psychoeducation, it's basically the level of psychoeducation that you're making is to you have to, I think it's important in CBT to educate the client on what this therapy entails. More than any other type of therapy, cognitive, because of the structure that presents itself over time, it is a good idea to let your client know that I am going to challenge you. I'm going to ask confrontational style questions, challenging style questions that may evoke a certain response. I'm going to ask you to act out or role play in a certain way, rational emotive and role play in different things, or rational behavior role play. I'm going to ask you to possibly restructure thoughts. You're going to have to complete homework. The work is just not, the work is not primarily done in therapy. The real work is actually done in your home environment. I give out a lot of homework because part of me recognizing whether or not you are really serious or not is how consistent you are with homework. Okay? If you're serious. Because I'm trying to work myself out of a job, out of a client. My job is not to have clients being codependent on me helping them. Because, see, people think therapy is about giving advice. No, it's not. Therapy is about implementing psychological distortions, things that we just talked about, those type of distortions. Correcting intermediate beliefs. We're looking at expectations, distortions, attitudes, and rules, things that you automatically, kind of a framework of who you are, those beliefs. We're correcting those intermediate beliefs that are not positive for you. Restructuring core beliefs. Okay? Your core beliefs as a person. Those core beliefs that are not necessarily positive. There are people who have all types of beliefs, and those particular beliefs are not necessarily beneficial to that person. What's up, Nurse and Relationships, and how are you doing, Miss Furlow? Appreciate you all for coming in today. Now, I highlighted homework, and the reason why I highlighted homework, because to me, this is the most important technique, is the facilitation Homework. I'm going to get to questions. I appreciate that question, Mella, but I'm going to do a Q&A. My Q&A is after I present all the information. But I will definitely answer this question because I deal with this, and that is a way of working past this. Okay? Homework. This lets me know if you're serious, particularly adults. Now, children, when I give homework, it's not as much, but it's more things that are more simplified in nature, where I know that it's just a matter of them working on a certain behavior. Now, for adults, it can be a little bit more complex. Like, say, for instance, I may ask a client to have a 45-minute conversation with a family member that they don't like 3 to 5 times a week, and to identify when they're interacting with that client changes in their behavior and thought process and their emotions. Homework is a little bit different. I'm asking them to identify anger, to identify sadness, or identify any of these distortions that are listed. That's a little bit more different. Or I may give therapeutic exercises. Okay. So but to me, in my experience, homework is critical in a person's overall development and improvement in reaching their therapeutic goals. Thought stopping techniques. I utilize thought stopping techniques a lot in therapy. I model how to use thought stopping techniques. I give a variety of ways to innately communicate to yourself to prevent anger, to prevent panic attacks, things of that sort. I also use a lot of positive self-talk that goes in conjunction with thought stopping techniques. Imagery changing. Now I made another error there. Change. Okay, I have to correct that. Using imagery. Utilizing imagery is something that I have a little type error in that too. I'm going to correct that. In using imagery is basically a psychological process of taking yourselves out of a certain setting mentally and being in another place. This can be calming, it can be relaxing. It is psychologically beneficial because a person is basically transferring out of a stressful situation to another situation. And I have to do a lot of modeling and behavioral instruction in that. Also, we're talking about rational emotional role play. And there's also behavior and emotive techniques, role play techniques too. Now, for these two, for rational emotive, it's more focused on you dealing with emotional attack. You're kind of countering behavior. You're identifying dysfunctional beliefs, and you're allowing a person to display themselves, and then you, as a therapist, may display the acts that they're doing, and you're identifying those behaviors and the emotions. I don't utilize that technique a whole lot. Uh, I have, but not a lot. At times, I do it. Um, I was going to read a vignette on that, but I'm gonna bypass reading a vignette on that. I may do that in another situation, but I don't want to get too technical. But I thought about reading some vignettes, but I'm gonna not do that. But in the process of role play, the client has to basically debate between rational and emotional parts of themselves, identifying what's rational or what's emotional. Uh, there's also a form of counter role play going on where the therapist is actually interacting. The same thing with behavioral and emotional. We're looking at more, instead of being more uh, rational, emotive is more about thinking rational or cognitive in thinking, and what's emotional. And then behavior is more about the actual observable behavior that's being displayed. Okay. You're looking at more of the beliefs and thoughts that contributed to that behavior, the dysfunctional behavior, I may add. Okay. Now, I'm going to look at the efficacy of CBT. It is an evidence-based, measurable research, measurable form of it's measurable research and supports its effectiveness. There's research to support the effectiveness of this. It's also effective in treating bipolar disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social phobia, and PTSD, amongst others. Okay. So this is, and again, as I talked about earlier, when I moved to the state of Texas, one of the reasons there was a shift because they wanted more therapy that can observe. You can observe a person's progress in their treatment plan. Effective with children with depression and anxiety. Research basically supports that. Research supports effectiveness with trauma focused, or as far as research supports effectiveness with trauma. And so basically with that, I'm talking about trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm currently certified in that area. I've taken trainings every 2 years. I have to take a training to be certified in trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'm gonna be honest, guys, trauma based cognitive behavioral therapy is not easy, because in that I'm dealing with a lot of clients who are severely sexually abused, and also physically too. But I facilitate this therapy a lot with children, and when you're going through the narrative steps and different things that you're helping children express themselves, because particularly with children, trauma focused therapy is more instructional based. It's not necessarily talk therapy, because you're basically preventing scripts. Client may draw scenes, they may act out certain scenes, and they're basically expressing their experience. And it's a traumatic experience. It's not easy to stomach some of the things you will see, because I've seen some very horrific, um, you know, just, I would say heart, just heart is just some, it will just touch your heart, some of the things, break your heart on some of those things. But as a therapist, you cannot be emotionally taxed by that. You have to still be in a clinical mind frame through that process. But sometimes, we are human. It can create some level of a response at times. Okay. Um, as far as CBT has measurable success with obsessive compulsive disorder, success with depression with adults. Now, the research, and I was reading, I'm actually going to do a little bit more research on this. And it talks about it not being as effective with schizophrenia and bulimia or other eating disorders. And I can understand, because I have a lot of clients who have schizophrenia, particularly at my facility. And one of the reasons that it's not as effective is because you're trying to counter psychosis with reality. And it in the challenging of that is not, I'm going to say this, in the challenging of that, it can actually evoke more issues. You have to really know what you're doing. But in my position, if I'm going to treat somebody with CBT, with psychosis or any type of schizophrenia, I'm going to make sure that they are highly stable for a certain period of time on their medication before I utilize that type of therapy. Okay, you're probably better off using something that's more behavioral related or um, emotionally focused in a sense, not necessarily you trying to get someone who is schizophrenic to think more logically or more rationally in the onset of a possible psychotic episode, or their baseline being somewhat psychotic. That can be um, a bit difficult. Also, when it comes to bulimia or anorexia nervoso, um, with eating disorders, what they found out is that research is showing that therapists or clinicians across the board are having issues as far as overcompensating of dealing with the cognitive side of things or the physiological side of things. So what's basically happening is that the school of thought of how to treat people with eating disorders, people are focusing. They say people are tending to focus more on like their observable eating behavior instead of focusing on their psychological thought process, or it goes vice versa. There's a difficulty in CBT obtaining some level of doing both in an effective manner. Okay, and so that's pretty much what has been going on when it comes to the efficacy or the inefficacy of treating those two illnesses. And there's probably others too, but I wanted to highlight those two as far as what research has provided. What's up, Bishop Macbone? Now we're going to go ahead and enter to the Q&A session here. If you have any questions based on anything that I have stated, you are more than happy to ask a question. We're in the Q&A. And so in the Q&A, I'm going to ask any questions that you all have based on what was stated. Now, I'm going to start with Mella. Mella stated, what if a client has a chaotic home environment that will not accommodate assignments? Now, it depends on the age of the client. Now, we're talking about children. If we're talking about children, this particular question holds more weight. When we're talking about teenagers and adults, not so much. And the reason is because with adults, whether they're living in a chaotic home, part of the homework is how to facilitate and change that environment, particularly for the adults. Now, for children, in the midst of a chaotic home, some of those homework assignments are not just relevant to practicing in the home environment. It also can be within their friends or in the school environment. Now, for children, this would greatly apply because in doing that homework, because homework is not like schoolwork. This homework is basically you given an assignment to practice a certain coping strategy, or learning to communicate, or doing something. You're learning a positive way, or you're practicing in your environment a certain way how to function. And yes, and in being in a chaotic home, it may be difficult to practice certain behaviors in the home setting, but you can practice them at school. You can practice them in other settings. And I'm gonna be honest, there are homes that are to me counterproductive to uh, you using these strategies, and that's why in the therapeutic process, particularly with children, particularly with adolescence period under 18, you are You are basically communicating with the family because they have to sign consent for them to get the therapy. So there has to be communication with the client's family to make sure that the environment is conducive to doing the homework. So that's going to be something that's up to the parents. It's a collective effort because when you're counseling a kid, there has to be family interaction. Now, the next question she asked was, could you highlight the 3-question technique? Uh, 3-question technique. I don't. I'm not understanding what you're saying. Oh, you mean the techniques that are used? Um, I can talk about therapeutic techniques, but or Socratic questioning. If you're talking about that, I'm not understand what you mean. 3-question. This is the therapeutic techniques that are used. Or maybe I'm missing something, or I said something. I'm not getting that. Uh, Now, I want you to understand, like, and I didn't want to talk more about this, but um, in please give more, like, I guess, more information on what do you mean by the 3-question technique, because these are the techniques that I listed. It may be referencing another type of technique from another counseling therapy. She's saying these. Okay, so basically, when we're dealing with that issue is going to be dealt with family. And so when I'm dealing with a chaotic situation, when you look at number 4, psychoeducation, building therapeutic, building, uh, report building, and being collaborative in presentation, meaning working with them, helping the family. This is stuff that's done in the initial phases. So and I've had this issue where clients complained about their home environment. And so in dealing with the home environment, I'm talking to, matter of fact, I have a family now. I have a family of 6 that I'm dealing with where the household can be chaotic. And so my process is to go through report building and being collaborative with the parents. I'm also engaging in therapeutic or Socratic questioning to help me understand that if you want your child to improve long term, we're going to talk about the irrationality of allowing the home to continue being this way. And I'm going to challenge automatic thoughts and identify the distortions, because they are going to answer. Because a lot of times in this process, Mela, the parents, which are going to be the primary focus of this, they can be very, what I would say, defensive about that. They can be very defensive, and it can produce a very, I would say, uneasy environment. But I'm concerned about the client. If this is a kids and things of that sort, we're going to have to facilitate. The house is going to have to be in a manner that can be conducive to the kid practicing their homework. So those are the few things that I would utilize. And I would, again, the main approach, we have to approach this from a rational, a logical standpoint. We're utilizing, what I utilize what's called cognitive restructuring, which is changing and challenging those things to new thoughts. And also monitoring their ability to be consistent with making sure that the household is not chaotic. Because that's the issue of the parent, not the child. So the primary approach is to work with the parent on that. Now you're stating, is it similar to rational emotive? You mean rational emotive therapy, behavioral therapy, or therapy? It is. Matter of fact, rational emotive therapy, rational emotive behavioral therapy is actually a form of cognitive therapy. Okay. We have another question. You say 3 questions to know whether. Okay. Give me 1 second. And rational motive therapy is was formulated by Albert Ellis. So Miller asks 3 questions to know whether your thoughts is rational. Is my thought based in fact? Does my thought help me achieve my goal? Does my thought help me feel the way I want to feel? Uh, those are rational questions to ask. Those are rational questions to ask. Those are not the only questions to ask, but those are questions to ask. Now, what I would say is, um, I would ask questions if I'm trying to figure out whether someone is thinking rationally or irrationally. I'm more on the position of asking, give me the evidence that your thought is accurate. Okay, can anybody else validate that thought process? What is the end result of you acting this way long term? So those are actually good questions to ask. Now, for me, my style, I don't ask. I may ask that, but I ask it in different ways. And following the cognitive, when you're doing classic cognitive behavioral therapy, it's about evidence based. It's about challenging and confronting. And so she said, to me, it relates to a concept that was introduced at HALT. I don't know what that is. Explain to me what HALT is. But those are good questions. Those are good questions to ask. Okay, so let me come back into the chat. Anybody else have any other questions? Um, Halt seems like emergency is not what he's on right now. Okay. I've never heard of that. I don't know if is that like some type of process or program or something like that. I'm not familiar with that. But obviously, relationship nursing knows it. So, okay. All right. Are there any other questions? Oh, she said before decision making, ensure you're not hungry, angry, lonely, tired. No, well, now that to me, um, that's about you being in a certain uh having all your mental faculties stable enough to make rational. Uh that's more physiological based than cognitive based. That's more related to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs per se, making sure that basic needs are taken care of. Now I get that because the hunger is more physiological, the anger is emotional, the loneliness and then tired. That's all psychological and base. So to me, it sounds like from the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, you want to make sure that you're in a stable uh mindset that lacks you needing something in order to make proper. You don't want to make proper, you're not going to make rational decisions if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. I get that. So this has more of a behavioral and a physiological aspect to people making irrational decisions, which I agree with. And it does have a basis. I would definitely look that up. I'm not familiar with that, but I would definitely look that up and and look at the efficacy of that. As far as the as people following that and getting feedback on that. Okay. Any other questions? Definitely gonna look up that. That's definitely like to learn new things. I'll check out HALT. If there are not any other questions, I'm gonna give it a couple of more. It's classic. Okay. I would definitely check that out. Again, guys, you want to support me on doing my presentations? You can also cash at me at DDarrell77 that is listed at the bottom. I hope that this presentation provided some level of information that will allow you to navigate either through yourself or identifying telltale signs of someone who has issues functioning in your environment. I wanted to give a social media related aspect and response to things to this presentation, because I know that there's a lot of dysfunction that goes on YouTube, and there are people who exhibit certain type of behaviors that is highly destructive and negative. Okay, there are people who come into this space with that type of mindset. Okay, so with that being said, if no other questions, I would like to again thank everybody for coming in today. I want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and close out the Q&A session. Again, I really enjoy having these discussions. Next week, I'm going to focus on dialectic behavioral therapy. I have to work on that one, which is a cognitive-based therapy also. I also am going to focus on talking about generalized anxiety disorder, which is an anxiety disorder that people asked about. All right. So with that being said, guys, I appreciate you all for being here. This is Coach D. Y'all have a great day. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please subscribe if you're new and also share the presentation. Have a great day.